Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Science, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. This is another astrological update by myself, Erik Roth. I am shamanic astrologer, also managing director of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And I'm here to provide some additional insights into what's going on in the sky with the planets, the signs, and it's through the vision, or the certainly the philosophy and the astrological paradigm of shamanic astrology. This shamanic astrology paradigm is was originated from Daniel Giamario and continues through the school, the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. So I'm going to dive in today. This is the third episode. I'm going to dive in today to look at the rest of April and what's happening from mid to late April here in 2020 and into the beginnings of May, and ending with a little bit of information about the middle of May, and to see what the crisis in this world, what the planets say about that, but also going into some other angles around this particular rich time that we live in right now. So here are the three major points that we're going to get into, with some sub-points throughout this. Mercury and Uranus, they're going to be entering into a conjunction, and there's a whole dynamic that's happening between Mercury, Uranus, and the Sun. The lunar nodes, beginning in early May, they shift into new signs for the first time in a year and a half, which that's how long it takes them to go from one pair of signs to the next pair of signs, astrological signs. And then upcoming retrogrades and a new phase. Some of these planets are beginning to slow down, in particular the ones that have been involved in the stellium, Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter. And I'm going to talk about that as we move forward here and what this means for all of us, and as we continue the themes of 2020. But first, I'd like to dive into, certainly this is a subject that's been coming up for me, for people that have been giving readings to, questions they've asked, information I've been drawing from online and various sources, and other friends and family. The concept of normal. What is normal? What are we going to, quote, return to normal? And we know, I think a lot of us understand that whatever normal was back, say, as most recently in 2019, that going forward after this major world event, that we're not going to return to that particular phase. I don't believe that whatever the expression of normal was back then, it's going to be a completely different thing. But I'd like to share a bit about what normal is, because we have kind of certainly we're viewing it through the eyes of the context in which we live. I'm always reminded, whenever I heard the word normal, reminded of, especially during this time, reminded of the book that I read by James Hillman, who's a Jungian psychologist. Wrote a book called A Terrible Love of War, and he dives into this the whole paradigm of war over these last several thousand years, and our quote affection with it, a love and hate relationship with war. But he also establishes some standards around the word normal. Norm and normal derive from the Latin word norma, meaning the carpenter's square. So it's a square that cuts in a certain level that, provides a block of normalcy for what they're trying to do. Hillman also goes on to describe a second definition that relates normal to the meaning of ideal or standard. So for example, even like the carpenter's square, it sets a standard for whatever is going to go after that, and other people create in what they build, furniture, buildings, assortment of other things, other tools. So what is normal, and will we return to it? As I shared, in recent months, we've seen whatever was our version of normal being completely upended. This is akin to a really like a slow moving that ended up becoming accelerated car accident that changed the fabric of how we connect with others, how we maintain our being and our routine in the world. All of this is changed. All of this is undergoing a composting. All of this is undergoing a sense of creation into something new. And this is bringing us to an unknown place, something that we've never had driven to before in our lives. So we are being shown what no longer works in our societal structures and systems. We're being given the opportunity to shed our collective skins, as it were. And that happens, as that happens, the structure of society itself is being composted, and we are being given a chance to surrender to emerging world soul, or the anima mundi. This is that's derived from the world, or you might say the concept of the soul of the planet Earth being Gaia herself. This is it's sort of a relationship with the feminine, and how we've treated this planet as a nurturing planet, a planet that provides a womb for all of us to thrive, to have a harmonious relationship with her. And that has been in unbalance, has been out of balance for at least the last few centuries, and certainly even more now than it ever has been. Even with all the protections and policies that have been put in there, we're seeing the climate change coming forth, and we're seeing a whole new set of instructions being transmitted to us about what to do about this. And yet we resist, we hold on to this old way of being, quote, normal, this old paradigm. And we know that we can't hold on to that forever. In fact, if we could endanger humanity, we can endanger most of the world if we continue to hold on to that particular concept, or that attachment to what we need in our lives. This is giving us a chance, this virus is giving us a chance to come within ourselves, to have introspection, to heal, to grieve, to be with us, to be with family, and to realize what's really important and what our journey could be about in the coming months. It gives us a chance to reflect upon that and to take action within ourselves to be more authentic in who we are, as it certainly aligns with being in harmony with the earth. In this recent time, we're seeing reductions, some of the silver linings here, reductions in pollution in certain areas around the globe. We're seeing certain activities being curtailed, and the structure of the economy and the way of our life changing and shifting, that is actually helping out Mother Earth in an interesting kind of way. This doesn't mean it's sustainable what we're doing here, but it's a gut check for all of us to come up with something that works better. With an emerging larger population, there around our connections to food, our connections to having a particular way of life. This is all coming into question, and we get to now, we're up to bat to explore all of this right now in our life. So as I write here, it is a time to return to the collective forge and realize through powerlessness, surrender, and our limits and boundaries, we can discover we all have the key to unlock ourselves from the chains of whatever we consider normal or normalcy. We can allow our ego to be of service to our soul's direction and not the other way around. We can all participate in the co-creation of a new operating manual for humanity. This is not going to happen, obviously, overnight. This is a multi-year, possibly multi-decade bed for creation for all of us. And there are other videos that Daniel Giamario has created, and Kaylin Costello of the school, that talked about this thing called the turning of the ages. Others have connected with that as well. We're at the turning of the ages, a great year in human history. What I mean by great year, it means a 26,000 year process is coming to an end, and a whole new 26,000 year process is being forged right now. This has to do with the precession of the equinox and the alignments of the sun and the solstice and some other signals that have appeared from an astrological alignments, that have come around and allowed us to peer into and have insight into what this calendrical change is all about. So coming up here in mid to late April and into May, some of the signs that we can see here, I mentioned in the last video in episode 2 that there is this plateauing that's happening around the pandemic. We're seeing a leveling off in many places. And in fact, there's signs, in fact, conversations, discussions about, okay, well, when do we reopen business? When do we, quote, return to normal? That sort of conversation. But we know that this is not going to be all done at once, and that there's going to be stages for all of this to take place. And when that does end up taking place, what will it look like? Well, we're getting a chance to see this coming up, and certainly mid-April is that conversation right now. Jupiter has exited a 1-degree orb from Pluto as of tomorrow officially. We're seeing the Mars-Moon conjunction, and Mars has moved away from Saturn, moved away from the Capricorn planets. So that whole relationship, Mars was a catalyst, an instigator, if you will, to help accelerate events to get us to a place where we needed to be, where Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter were all in Capricorn especially during the end of February and throughout March. And now we get to experience this slowing down that's starting to take place of the like, for example, in the beginning of this year, there was a slow acceleration, and then at the end of February and into beginning of March, you might say the forces that the powers that be put the pedal to the metal and the gas pedal, and it just accelerated our human vehicle, very fast, and now we're kind of leveling off on that speed and not going as fast. That there's been some changes to the velocity of our vehicle, and the thickness of the air that we're more up against. So there's kind of a maximum, if you will, that we're up against. So coming up in a few days, the sun ends up moving into Taurus, which is also playing a role into helping us slow down. The sun being in Aries, and some Aries-like energy, and that there certainly is a very fiery, a push to the limits kind of a sign. And then on the 20th, we have a Sun-Saturn square, Taurus Aquarius. This is kind of a dynamic. I talked about Taurus and Aquarius a lot in the last video, and there'll be other videos that we'll talk about. Then this one, I'm not going to be sharing too much about that, but I will share more on Taurus here, especially this new moon coming up on the 22nd, new moon at 3 degrees Taurus. This is going to involve Uranus as well during that time. We can see up here Pluto going retrograde on April 24th, May 10th, Saturn going retrograde May 12th, Venus going retrograde, and May 13/14, depending on where you are on the planet, Jupiter finally goes retrograde. So, and I'm going to talk about retrogrades when we get closer to the end of this video, but that's a topic in of itself. One of the other major points here, Mercury-Uranus conjunction at 6 degrees Taurus on April 30th. And then we have the lunar nodes ingressing or moving into the signs of Gemini and Sagittarius. So let's get to it, to the next frame. This was the recent Mars Moon conjunction. This is happening at the filming of this video, April 15th, 2020. You could go out and see this in the early morning sky. And if it's not cloudy or rainy, you can certainly check out Saturn and Jupiter also in the sky, which is really powerful seeing these planets with the moon. The moon has been passing by this area. So this is kind of a signal for us moving into a new phase of this dynamic that's the stellium or cluster of planets in Capricorn and Aquarius. Coming up here on the 22nd, we see the new moon taking place at 3 degrees 24 Taurus. We can see Uranus in conjunction or just a few degrees away from the sun during this time. Mercury not far on the other side of the sun. And we can see the star Menkar. Obviously, none of this is visible to the naked eye because the sun will be is obviously too bright to be able to see all of this. But it's continuing to move through this watery area of the sky and moving into between the Ram and the Satis constellation, or the Whale, or the sea creature, sea monster, some people call it, depending on one's cultural perspective. We can see that taking place there on the 22nd. And this is a kind of an interesting lineup in this area. One of the things about this area moving from Aries into Taurus, this boundary I highlight here, is that the Andromeda Galaxy also sits in this area a little farther above the sun, where the sun will be, and it'll be another month or so before we can actually see the Andromeda Galaxy again after the sun passages through this other constellation. So this is an interesting area, kind of a boundary for one sign into the next, but it's a boundary that slowly precesses over time against the background of stars due to the long wobble of the Earth. So what does this new moon mean? Well, again, it happens on April 22nd. Uranus is only about 3 degrees away from this new moon. The new moon can act as both a stabilizing agent and an opportunity for a breakthrough in this incarnation due to Uranus's proximity here, a new breath of life. This is a moment between the exhalation and the inhalation, and then the release in the days ahead. A person can pause briefly during this time for comfort, introspection, and pleasure, a life full of promise ahead. So these are qualities that we're bringing in of the Taurus archetype, the Taurus sign that I'm sharing, along with the combination of the planet Uranus. And it's kind of wild card energy and kind of bursting through walls. So I'm already feeling that there are some breakthroughs going on right now in the world, not just in the situation with the COVID-19, but in other walks of life that are giving us an opportunity to see beyond where we were prior to the shelter in place that's taking many billions of people are having to experience on this planet. One of the symbols that sometimes I go into, especially in situations like a new moon, is something called a Sabian symbol. And these look at each degree of the zodiac, 360 degrees, as a point, an image to look at. What is that represent? What does that degree represent? Well, in the Sabian symbols, it counts from 1 to 30. In zodiacal degrees, it's from 0 to 29. So we add 1 to this. And so this 3 degrees, 24 minutes of Taurus ends up being 4 Taurus. And the image that comes into this new moon, it definitely caught my attention, was the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. This is from astrologer Linda Hill. And she writes about this not just as the image of the pot of gold, but the journey to get to that pot of gold, that rainbow, that what are we journeying to get there, the expectations we have, what, quote, treasures lie beyond the horizon, that, where the rainbow goes. This is, part of the entirety of the image. It's not just that wow, things are going to be great because there's this great pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but the journey to get there, and that requires certain level of focus and concentration, but also expansion and opening up of the mind and realization of the gifts that we can give ourselves during that journey to get to that quote pot of gold, that image that I'm sharing here. So this is certainly a different look at what has been happening in the world, but so this new moon can be a nice contributor to balance out the intensity that's happening right now. Coming up on April 30th, Mercury-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. This is adding into the additional Tauran energy that took place, that started in with the new moon and continuing 8 days later when they have a conjunction. This is adding on to the relationship between the mind and the body, and the mind's connection to being able to feel through our senses, to be able to experience the pleasures and comforts in life, and realize that this is a gift at what we're experiencing right now, and we can take advantage of it and kind of come out of the place of ego, of mental, just mental stimulation, but into a place where we can be in our gardens, that we can be in our home, and with our family, or with our and food, that we can be in that softness and to balance out what is happening in this and currently in this life. We can see that at the end of this process, I'm going to talk about more with, there's a next Mars moon conjunction, which is kind of signaling the kind of the middle region of this new phase that we're entering into. And we can see from this picture that Mars has moved out quite a long way from where it was in March. In March, it was traveling through the area where Jupiter and Saturn were, as well as where Pluto is. And it's, making its way toward Neptune, which is, kind of happen in June. Well, there will be a conjunction with those two planets. The next big bullet point is these lunar nodes. And for those of you that are not familiar with what lunar nodes are, these are intersection points between the orbit of the moon and the path of the sun as seen from Earth. So they directly relate to eclipses. This is why we have these lunar and solar eclipses that take place about every 6 months somewhere on the planet. And this graphic that I'm showing you here is a graphic to help you get a kind of a feel for how those two elliptical circles interact, and that there is a north node and a south node. So when the moon is heading down, intersecting with the path of the sun, it's going and connecting with the south node, and it's going up, it's connecting with the north node. In an astronomical language, they called it an ascending node and descending node. It's basically the same thing. So these are the eclipse season the next eclipse season doesn't happen until June and July, but this is kind of paving the way for this, because these two nodes, which move backwards, they're the only things that move backwards. So they have to do with the oscillation of the moon's orbit around the Earth, where the moon isn't just circling, but it's going up and down, and it's going away and toward the Earth. So it's having all of these different movements as it orbits the Earth, due to its connection also to, tugged a bit by our sun as well. So on May 4th, that this is the first time since 2001 and 2003 when the North Lunar Node will be in the sign of Gemini and the South Lunar Node in the sign of Sagittarius. The nodal polarity was reversed in 2011 to 2012. So this gives you some indication of obviously what was taking place in that time. That was also a great change on this planet in 2001 during the time of 9/11. There were some other things that were happening that also signal into this time being obviously a great change. But this is one of the factors that's coming up for us to connect with, that this year isn't just, oh, we're done with the pandemic and we can return to normal by the summer or whenever that might be. That there's all these other things that are going to come up. This is a year of years in many astrological circles, that a lot of astrologers are looking towards this year uh, of a great happening taking place, and we're now in the midst of it. But there's going to be other shifting that's going to be happening, some of it related to the pandemic, others, different things that come into humanity, and changes, political, economic changes, social changes that we're experiencing, and some of the fallout from that, the changes, what they result in will come through. So Gemini and Sagittarius, what does this mean? This is this polarity will go on from May 4th, 2020, all the way until January 18th, 2022. The axis of the signs, generally speaking, is about imagination, movement, truth and meaning, co-creating our journey. Sagittarius and Gemini have a very free-loving spirit. They are trailmates. They are, they dance to their own tunes. They go their own path. They don't follow the same wavelength necessarily as the Capricorn and Cancer and Aries and Libra, which are the signs that belong to a different modality called the householder, or in traditional astrology called cardinal signs. So they're in traditional astrology, Sagittarius and Gemini are mutable, but in shamanic astrology language, we look at them as in service to spirit. So it gives them a little bit more definition about how they operate. So the seasonal location of the nodes determines where the solar and lunar eclipses take place. And that there's a big one coming up on the solstice, June 20th/21st, depending on where you are on the planet, as an annular eclipse at that time. And I'll certainly talk about that in a future episode, but that's something to connect with. That's a big one that's coming up, and it's going to be right in the some call it the hand of the high man, but in the outstretched arm of Orion, in the center of the sacred hoop of stars at the galactic edge. So it's a really specific area and very rare for an eclipse to take place right at that middle point. So we're going to definitely want to pay attention to that more as we move forward. So the South Lunar Node, in astrological terminology, represents our connection to origin, past, and the North Lunar Node represents the direction toward future, or maybe loosely called connected to the concept of destiny. So we get a chance to fine tune with that, and for those people that have if you are following astrology, if you understand at least parts of your chart, and if you've had readings before or you practice astrology, then there's an awareness of these nodes moving into Sagittarius and Gemini, that you're going to be going through a nodal transit for yourself on a personal level. I myself have a lot of Sagittarius on my chart, with a little bit of Gemini, and as far as where Saturn is concerned. And so I will be going through a long period of transit with the South Node going through Sagittarius. The South Node has a very Saturnian-like feel to it. It's very like real world, growth through limits and boundaries, crossroads, major decisions. The North Node is more expansive, more akin or resonant with the way way we experience Jupiter in astrology. So now we turn our attention to the retrogrades, because this is really big, what's coming up in my next video, which will be likely in the beginning of May of this year. We also share more about this, but beginning this month, Pluto on April 24th will go retrograde, Saturn on May 10th, Venus on May 12th, and Jupiter May 13, 14. And 3 of those planets have been clustered together. In fact, they're within 6 to 7 degrees of each other right now, and will continue to be in May as well. So, but retrogrades are, we don't I don't look at it from a judgmental place. This is not that retrogrades are bad and direct motion is good. In fact, since February, since the point when Mercury went direct, and it was at the very beginning of March there, but all planets have been in direct motion or forward motion from our perspective, standing and sitting on Earth here. So we can see at least in this case, the results of this, where this is still kind of a concept of looking into what astrologically, symbolically speaking, what's happening. But there appears to be a greater acceleration that's happening when everything's moving directly. So now we're approaching a time, and the end, we can see the last week of April, and then of course by mid-May, we've got 4 planets moving into retrograde motion. When that happens, planets are slowing down in the sky, so that looks like they're not moving very much at all, and they're stationary. And in the case of Venus, Venus is catching up with Earth. The other planets, Earth is catching up with those planets. So the planet ends up spending a lot of time at the particular location in the sky, tracing back and forth over a certain area. So this places an emphasis on that sign and that starry area. So in this case, it's going to be placing emphasis on more about Capricorn, Aquarius, and in the case of Venus, Gemini. And these signs are definitely prominently featured right now. So more about the mean, again, not good or bad, especially with the outer planets, Jupiter and outward. These planets every single year spend anywhere from 4 to almost 6 months in retrograde motion. So it doesn't have as much, it's not as meaningful as, say, Venus, Mars, or Mercury in retrograde motion, because they spend a lot less time going retrograde depending on their orbit and their dynamics. Mercury happens to do it about 3, sometimes 4 times a year. Mars only once every 2 years, so it's a lot more rare, and Mars will do that again in September. And then Venus, only for about 6 weeks does it go retrograde, and then it doesn't do it again for another 19 months, roughly speaking. So we can see that the more rare, the more meaningful it is. And but it is a special year because Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are all kind of still clustered together and will be for the rest of this year, going back and forth. It's interesting that they all go into direct motion in September, October, after this retrograde period, within 3 weeks of each other. Pluto was the first to station retrograde this month here in April, and it'll be the last to go into direct motion in October. So Pluto, of course, that's nearly 6 months for Pluto, because it's way out there and it just spends an inordinate amount of time orbiting the sun. But it's rare for all these alignments to be together like this. There's a new phase that's coming in, a new phase of Capricorn Aquarius, stellium. Mainly Capricorn, but Aquarius is definitely part of this dynamic. In fact, at the end of this year, Saturn and Jupiter having a conjunction in the early degree of Aquarius. So since the beginning of the year, there has been this acceleration of events that is related to the cluster of planets in Capricorn. We can experience these effects by the recalibration and composting of systems and structures all around the planet, especially here in the United States. This new phase has begun already as of this recording, with Mars leaving the area of Saturn and Jupiter slowly separating itself from Pluto. The signals an opening up of channels, a release of the tension that has been built up very strongly. So I've seen some governors' announcements here in the United States about what they're looking to do in the near future, about the restrictions, but there's still a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there, and bad information out there about what we can do, what we can't do, and even around protecting ourselves around this particular pandemic. And I think that in part because this is a whole new experience for here in the West. They've experienced this before in Asia with other pandemics, but it's been a really long time that we've had such a powerful impact from a virus in our world. So the cluster of planets begin to move backward beginning on April 24th with Pluto. And then Venus joins in, going retrograde in May and June. While it doesn't mean that things, quote, return to normal, it does give us a chance to catch our breath and open up to a potential reinvigoration of how we want to go about creating a new operating manual of life and spirit. So we have a chance to really look at something really potent. This is a change of the overall current and a cauldron of creation that's taking place here. With Venus and Gemini, there's three conjunctions this year between Venus and Vesta in Gemini, something I mentioned briefly in the last video. And it's signaling for us to connect with ourselves, to really reach in and take advantage of the time. If we can create some extra time for ourselves to reach in to think more creatively and letting go of things that no longer are important to us, and how we plan our lives, how we do our routine, how we interact with others. This is a time to connect with ourselves. But I will share for myself as well as from hearing from others around that this experiment that's happening with the world, with humanity and the social distancing, it is taking its toll on society. I believe that the extreme measures that there is even though that it has an intent of protecting us, it has things around being isolated. And human beings are naturally social beings. Doesn't mean every single human being needs to be social. Some are more extroverted than others. There's a lot of variables there, but we naturally connect in community. And we can certainly do it temporarily over video or over the phone, but it's definitely not something in my own experience and my own personal readings that I've been giving, interactions with clients, many hundreds, thousands of people over the many years I've been doing this and been involved in shamanic astrology school, that physical connection, being in physical connection with other human beings, is vital to our own livability in this world. And that to quarantine us for long periods of time it's not just about the economics of it, but about how our own mental health, the health of our heart space and who we are, because this isn't something that you can turn off overnight. This is something that collectively what Mother Nature wants from us, from what I've seen and what I've been reading about from peer-reviewed articles from different universities, things that are more balanced and kind of take a detached look at about what's really going on and the need for humanity to come together in community, to connect with each other and to realize what's really important. So I'm seeing that by mid to late May, a greater opening up of more social contact to take place. And in my next video, I'll be able to have a better gauge for that. But based on the astrology, I definitely can see that happening a bit more around that time. I'm already reading articles about different countries planning to reopen certain kinds of businesses and smaller gatherings. So we're going to see what's going on here, but astrologically, it's certainly a loosening up of things. It's not so constricted as it has been, especially as it was in March. Excuse me, and the unpredictableness that's been happening. So Here's looking ahead again. May 12th, this is an amazing day. The moon will be conjunct Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn all on this day. Venus will also retrograde, and by the star Elnath, which is the tip of the horn of the bull. And on that same day, Mars enters the sign of Pisces, which in the next video, I'm going to talk a lot more about Mars in Pisces. But the tip of that, the bull's horn, is part of the dynamic of this great sacred hoop of stars. And the bull constellation itself is definitely connected more to the feminine energy, and has a great long shared cultural mythology, especially in the Mediterranean and Mesopotamian areas, around the changeover from the matriarchal cultures to the patriarchal cultures. And so this may, Venus being there, may signal a chance for the feminine to move into a new space, a new way of expressing itself through being in the sign of Gemini, through imagination and mental experience, and doing it in a sacred way, like Coyote Woman or Peter Pan, the divine comedian. As I mentioned here, on May 15th, Venus and Vesta conjunct the second time, and the third one will take place actually in the sign of Leo on September 22nd. So that's quite a ways out. But it's rare for Vesta and Venus, or Vesta really in any planet, to have three conjunctions in 1 year like this. But certain cycles you can see this take place. Vesta represents one's inner sacred hearth, and I'm actually writing a book about this. It's in the editing phase right now, and it should be out a little bit later this year. But I'm certainly watching this situation with Venus and Vesta, and Venus's incarnation of the next time it does a morning star rise in June. So May 13th, Jupiter stations retrograde, or 14th, depending on where you live, and only 7 degrees separates Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn from each other. And at first, the planets will get a bit closer in June, July, and then begin to open up in August and September, and then again close up again in October and November, and in December. So there's going to be kind of up and down with this. And so just something to be prepared for. I may do other special videos that are more related to different themes. This is just kind of catching looking at the calendar overall, coming up these next several weeks, and moving forward, and what we can do to be more informed of these astrological energies. Venus retrograde, this is another powerful thing that I'm going to share more about in the next video, but I will share just a few highlights here. Venus is retrograde from May 12th to June 24th, staying in Gemini the entire time. This includes about a 12-day period where Venus will be between the Sun and Earth and not be visible. In part of Venus's journey, she is looked at symbolically as beginning her transition from one incarnation to another, and at the end of the journey, before rising as a morning star, June 9th and 10th. She will then have metamorphosized into a new form that's known as the sign of Gemini. Retrograding for Venus places emphasis in the sign of Gemini, so it's placing emphasis in that bull constellation between Pleiades and the horns of the bull, and near the galactic edge, which is where the June solstice point is. So all that is all wrapped up into that space where Venus is retrograding back and forth. This is a time for higher levels of imagination, working on a deeper level of the creative communicative mind to see beyond this Coyote Woman or Peter Pan archetype that Gemini represents. The mind can't know it all, as Daniel Giamari likes to say, and this initiation for Venus assists in a wave of incorporating knowledge with new language beyond middle world constructs. So it's trying to get out of bounds and get a whole new perspective, and as Gemini can act as a contrarian at times, and be able to give us insight from that view. And for more, obviously I talk about Venus as well, but Kaylin Costell and Tammy Brunk do a wonderful Venus alchemy series that can be helpful in really getting into the Venus goddess archetype. Also, Emily Trinkus is also valuable in her sharing, connecting with some of her teachings. Daniel Giammario was the one who came up with the connection to the Venus synodic cycle in our own experience in ourselves as it relates to as above, so below. So what's happening in the sky and what's happening here. And there's, of course, there's others that talk about Venus in their own way, and there's valuable information and wisdom all over the place. But these are just some of the things you can also connect with. And I'm going to be doing this, of course, as of the date of this video. I do personal readings. I also do classes, online material. I'm also going to be doing a special, upcoming special on readings. And so stay tuned for that. In the next few days, you'll be seeing a notification from me if you subscribe to my newsletter on inspiralnexus.com. And I want to thank you for watching. I love presenting this material. Feel free to check in, share your comments and suggestions, by email or in the comments below. There'll be more and more of this coming up in the future, and I'm happy to explore this even deeper. This is I'm following my passion of astrology, and it really comes out here, and it gives me a chance to really connect with all of you. There will be articles too forthcoming in the future. I've just been putting some attention on getting these videos going and started so that people can get some visuals around what I'm talking about here. So I wish everyone a happy rest of the April, and take care of yourselves, and that this dark time in humanity is also not just solidly black or dark or just shadowed, but that there is light in all of that. There is a kaleidoscope of creation that is happening here, and we are blessed and have the gift to be able to tap into that for ourselves. So I want to thank you all, and until next time, be well. Thank you, everyone.